Hello, grade 8s. This is a lesson on solving one-step equations. I suggest if you go back, it'll be beneficial for you if you go back to the solving equations introductory lesson. Kind of shows you what I'm going to be talking about here when I start talking about algebra and solving it algebraically. So very simple, solving equations of one step is the easiest kind. So an example is this question. I'm trying to figure out what x is. So the rule that we learned before is x is always going to be, has to live on its own, has to be all on its own. So an equation has a left side and a right side. The equal sign divides the two sides. So here we have x, but it's got a positive 5 beside it. It wants to be by itself, so I have to get rid of the positive 5. In order to do that, I add its opposite. So I add negative 5 to this side, and we learned that whatever you add to one side, you do to the other. So I add negative 5 to both sides. What that does to here is a positive 5, when you add negative 5, these two will just cancel out. So we just stroke it out like that, and we're left with x all by itself equal to negative 8 plus the negative 5, that equals negative 13. There's our answer. Okay, and that's what we do. We solve equations. So here's an equation with x over here. Here's your equal sign, right? Dividing your left and right side. So here we have 12 is equal to 7. It looks like take away x, but actually this take away x is thought of as negative x. So we have 7 negative x on this side. Well, this negative x wants to be by itself, so I have to get rid of this 7, which I hope you agree is positive. So in order to get rid of a positive 7, you do the opposite. So you add the negative 7. And if I do that to this side, I do it to this side. And we put it like so. Now these cancel out because they're opposites. So we are left with, on the left side, 5. And 5 is equal to this negative x. Okay? Now we can never leave the answer as a negative x. X always must be positive. So what I do is I have to write its opposite. So the opposite of negative x is positive x. Now I have the positive. But if I made this its opposite, I also have to make this the opposite. So x is negative 5. And that's what I want. Okay? I always want the positive of x. So you flip it over to its positive, but whatever this is, you make it also its opposite, and that's your answer. Okay? This one here is 4x is equal to 48. So I want to, here's the 4x. The x is over here on the left side. It's got a 4 beside it. That 4 is a multiplier, 4 times x. So I do the opposite of times 4, which is divide 4. And that's how we write it, divide 4. Whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. Okay? Now, when you take 4 divide 4, they basically cancel out because you end up with 1x. And we don't need that one, so we'll just cancel them out. We're left with x. X is equal to 48 divided in 4. Well, that's 12. And that's our answer. X equals 12. We always want x equals something. Okay, number 4. Here's our equal sign, right? There's our left side, right side. X is on the right side. X has a negative 6 as a multiplier, so we have to do the opposite of multiply by negative 6. So the opposite of that is divide by negative 6. And whatever we do to one side, we do to the other. And what that does is it cancels out these two here, because a negative 6 divided by negative 6 is 1x. And I don't need that one, so it just cancels out. So we got x equals to a negative divide negative is a positive. 36 divides 6 is 6. So x is equal to 6, or positive 6. One thing I forgot to mention, if you don't like it written this way, where it's 6 equals x, you can also change it to x equals 6, if that makes you feel better. Same with this one over here. We had negative 5 equals x. If you didn't like that, you could also write x equals negative 5. Okay, and that's how we solve so far these equations. I just got a couple of more to do. And it's the type that looks like this of the one step. So we have x divided by x divided by 5 is equal to negative 50. So what I want to do is I want to get this x by itself. Now you notice this x is divided by 5. This is a divide. So the opposite of dividing 5 is how I get x by itself. So I multiply by 5. And that's how we write it. So whatever I do to one side, I do to the other. So I have to times this by -5 as well. Sorry, by 5. So I multiply both sides by 5. These two will cancel out because when you divide something by 5 and then you multiply it by 5, you're ending up with 1. And so we're ending up with 1x, or just x, exactly what we want. And x is equal to -50 times 5, so that works out to be -250, and that is our answer for x, and that's what I want. Okay, and the last little equation we're going to try is -9 is equal to a -x divided in 8. So here's our equal sign. I want to get this -x all by itself. I have to do the opposite of what's being done to it. It's divided by 8, so I want to multiply it by 8. And whatever I do to one side, I have to do to the other. So I multiply this by 8. And so these two will cancel out, right, because they will basically equal 1. So we are left with, on the left side, -9 times 8 is -72. That works out to be -x. And now here we have a situation, again, x cannot be negative, so I have to make it its opposite to positive. But whatever I do to one side, I must do the opposite to the other here. So there's our answer. X is equal to 72. And that's how we solve that equation. And finally, there are some problems, as always, where this is an example of one where you have to write an equation and then also solve it. Okay, so Pedro scored 3 times the number of goals that his teammate Emilio did. If Pedro scored 42 goals, how many goals did Emilio score? Question mark. So what I'm looking for is, in this question, how many goals did Emilio score? Now, Emilio is like our x. Like up here, we're looking for x. I don't know what Emilio scored, but I'm going to figure it out. But instead of calling Emilio x, I'm going to use the first, a better letter, the first initial, the first letter of his name. So I'm going to use E. So my equation has to have the letter E. So Pedro scored 3 times the number of goals that Emilio did. And Pedro scored 42. So the equation must be then that if Pedro scored 3 times Emilio, so we say 3 E's, and he scored 42 goals, 3E equals 42. There's our equation. Now we're just going to solve it. So 3E means 3 times E, right? So in order to get E by itself, I have to do the opposite of multiply 3, so I divide 3. Whatever I do to one side, I do to the other, right? Remember this? Now 3's can cancel out because 3 divided 3 is 1. 1E, or Emilio, is equal to 42 and 3 divided by 3. So that's it, and Emilio scored 14 goals, and that is the answer. And that's how you use algebra and using an equation to get the answer. Anyways, I hope that helps, and I hope you enjoyed that lesson. Have a good day.